the mind of Thomas Sankara, the determination of Patrice Lumumba, the vision of Nkrumah, these weren't anomalies. They're the normal, natural, healthy state of a decolonized mind, of a liberated mind coming from a liberated people. They're examples of what Africa would have been, should have been, and inshallah, bi'ithnillah, still will be. But the West systematically crushed the conditions necessary even for normalcy to flourish. The West's relative power is receding. That old wolf still has fangs, but the global South is raising some young lions of their own today. They're reviving the spirit of Lumumba and Sankara and Nkrumah. Your grip on Africa is being pried open. And yes, of course, I'm talking about Ibrahim Traoré in Burkina Faso. And all the leaders in the Sahel Alliance countries, obviously, but especially Ibrahim Traoré. You know, it's often only in retrospect that we recognize the magnitude of a figure who shifts the course of history. It shifts the course of events in the world. But if anyone's paying attention, you can all see that Ibrahim Traoré is clearly one of the most consequential leaders, not just in Africa, not just in the Muslim world, but in the entire global South and in fact, in the world. Ibrahim Traoré led a coup against a government that was subservient to its foreign masters. You know, there's been many, many coups across the continent, but usually those just replaced one neo-colonial agent with another, usually. But Ibrahim Traoré is different. He's not just changing the government. He is uprooting the whole system of neo-colonial domination. And he's succeeding. He's understood what many people have failed to grasp, which is that independence is meaningless if you don't sever the control of the owners and controllers of global financialized capital. He's understood that security is a myth as long as it depends on the military patronage of your former colonizers. And he's understood that sovereignty is impossible under the shadow of Western tutelage. He's not merely a head of state. Ibrahim Traoré is the revolutionary archetype of the 21st century. Burkina Faso isn't just a battleground today for the Burkinabe people. It's the front line in a global struggle for liberation. What Ibrahim Traoré is doing is echoing in the Sahel, in Niger, in Mali, across Africa, across the Ummah, across the global South, and across the world. Every oppressed people around the world can now look to Burkina Faso and to Ibrahim Traoré and say liberation looks like it's actually possible. But obviously, the global order trembles at the prospect that anyone is going to follow his example. Understand, Ibrahim Traoré isn't just fighting insurgents and militants in the desert. No, every time he has to meet with some Western diplomat or politician or ambassador, he's fighting that same enemy. They're just wearing a suit and tie. That's why there's going to be a continent-wide protest at the end of this month. I think it's on the 30th. And I really hope that we'll see activists fill the streets all around the world, not just in Africa. It's a demonstration in support of Ibrahim Traoré, in support of Burkina Faso, and it's a protest against American and Western threats against him. And I really hope, wallahi, that we see massive numbers globally participating in this. Wallahi, I hope that even we'll see people of the Ivory Coast turn out for it. Listen, this is important. Burkina Faso is important. Ibrahim Traoré is important for everyone, not just for Africans, not just for the Burkinabes. This isn't about idolizing the man. It's about understanding the importance of what he represents. And what he represents is a paradigmatic shift that the whole world needs.
It is a great time of seeing new generations of Africans working towards liberating their countries. For centuries, Africa, the birthplace of humanity, has been exploited, betrayed, and robbed of its wealth. But today, we're witnessing a new wave of resistance, courage, and unity among African nations. African leaders of the past have fought for liberation, only to be sabotaged by Western powers with the help of African sellouts. But today's youth, inspired by leaders like Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso, are saying, enough is enough. Africa is rising, and this time, the world is watching. Today, we will hear a powerful message from Shahid Bolsen.
You know, when people talk about a Patrice Lumumba or a Kwame Nkrumah, for example, or Thomas Sankara, or even Sukarno, they always say that they were ahead of their time. But that's not true. They weren't ahead of their time. They were not revolutionary thinkers, if you know what I mean. They were just incredibly astute, mature, sensible men with a very crystal clear understanding about how things should be. There was nothing futuristic or utopian in their visions. They just understood and identified exactly what had been done to Africa and what was being done to Africa. And they understood exactly what liberation and what sovereignty required. You know, if they had been leaders in the West, no one would have called them revolutionary or even visionary. They just would have been regarded as logical, sound, rational, reasonable men who had an intricate understanding of economics and politics and basic fairness. I'm not saying this to slight them, not at all. I'm saying this to emphasize the heinous criminality of the Western power structure and how it has dealt with Africa. Because if you were a leader in Africa in the 1950s, the 1960s, the 70s, or the 80s, and you had a sound mind, a rational mind, you had an understanding of politics and economics, and you had an understanding of what's required for sovereignty and fairness, well, that made you a revolutionary, calling for, pursuing basic fairness and sovereignty and independence for an African leader, saying things and doing things and implementing policies that just made sense for your nation, constituted rebellion. No, they weren't ahead of their time. Time refused to advance. Time was being held back, especially in Africa. The West, Europe, the UK, and America refused to allow Africa to exist in the present day. Not just Africa, of course, all across the global South. But nowhere was this more the case than in Africa. You understand? I pointed out before, more than once, relationships between countries, between continents evolve and develop and change over time. We've seen drastic changes in international relationships in just the last 20 years. In fact, we've seen drastic changes in just the last 4 or 5 years. You know, even the last 100 days, to be honest. But the West's relationship with Africa has remained essentially the same for 1,000 years. Subjugation and extraction, looting and pillage. So for Lumumba or Nkrumah, it was the 1960s, but for the West, it was still the 1860s, the 1760s, the 1660s. For the West, Africa was frozen in time, and they kept it frozen in time by force. They kept it frozen in time by violence, by assassination, by coups, by invasions, and by hostage governments and collaborators. They kept it frozen in time by predatory lending, by neoliberal policy coercion, by manufactured debt and abusive trade policies. You know, when they can't send soldiers, they send consultants. So no, those great leaders weren't ahead of their time. The West stopped time in Africa. And understand this, when you arrest the forward movement of a people, when you stop them in time like that, you're not just stealing their wealth, you're stealing their future. You're robbing them of possibility. You're burying generations that have not even been born yet under the rubble of your exploitation. Because what could have been created, what could have been discovered, what could have been achieved, it never gets a chance to exist. The mind of Thomas Sankara, the determination of Patrice Lumumba, the vision of Nkrumah, these weren't anomalies. They're the normal, natural, healthy state of a decolonized mind, of a liberated mind coming from a liberated people. They're examples of what Africa would have been, should have been, and inshallah, bi'ithnillah, still will be. But the West systematically crushed the conditions necessary even for normalcy to flourish. You see, you don't just kill the leaders when you kill the leaders or when you overthrow the leaders. You steal the future that those leaders could build. You know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in the Quran that when you kill one person unjustly, it's as if you killed all of mankind. Well, that isn't just metaphorically true. In the case of the leaders that the West has destroyed in Africa, they also destroyed millions of lives along with them. Millions of living and unborn lives have been destroyed in terms of their hopes, their opportunities, their rights, their freedom, their independence, their sovereignty. Well, you can trace the carnage going on right now in Congo today, all the way back to the assassination of Patrice Lumumba. They assassinate the idea. They assassinate the man who represents the idea so that future generations will look back and go, well, you know, they tried and they failed, so we better not bother. It's psychological warfare across time. Because if you can make a people believe that liberation is impossible, if you can make them believe that wanting sovereignty is naive and that dignity is an unrealistic hope, then you don't even have to conquer them anymore. They'll remain conquered inside themselves. And please understand, when we talk about people like Sankara, Nkrumah, Lumumba, Sukarno, we're actually just talking about the natural state of a decolonized mind. We're not talking about something extraordinary. We're talking about what's supposed to be normal, not exceptional, normal. They didn't have utopian visions for their countries. Like I said, they wanted their countries to be normal. But the West would not allow it. And back then, the West had the power to prevent it. The relative power, that's the key point. They had the relative power to prevent it. They had the relative power to steal Africa's future by prolonging its past by force. But as I've talked about many times, the West's relative power is receding. That old wolf still has fangs, but the global South is raising some young lions of their own today. They're reviving the spirit of Lumumba and Sankara and Nkrumah. Your grip on Africa is being pried open. And yes, of course, I'm talking about Ibrahim Traoré in Burkina Faso. And all the leaders in the Sahel Alliance countries, obviously, but especially Ibrahim Traoré. You know, it's often only in retrospect that we recognize the magnitude of a figure who shifts the course of history, it shifts the course of events in the world. But if anyone's paying attention, you can all see that Ibrahim Traoré is clearly one of the most consequential leaders, not just in Africa, not just in the Muslim world, but in the entire global South and in fact, in the world. From my perspective, from the prism through which we analyze the struggle for justice and sovereignty and dignity, Ibrahim Traoré's emergence is nothing short of historic. I mean, alhamdulillah, we have many great Muslim leaders in the world today, despite what everyone says. We have great leaders, many. But in my opinion, Ibrahim Traoré is the most important. Burkina Faso, the land, they call it the land of upright people, has again produced an upright man, not only for their country, not only for the Ummah, but for all of humanity. First, they gave us Thomas Sankara, who was a Catholic. But his life was extinguished before he could ever reach the full, before he could realize his vision. But today, in Ibrahim Traoré, we see that vision revived and refined and aligned with the consciousness of Islam. We don't have any hesitation acknowledging Thomas Sankara. We're proud of anyone, regardless of their faith, who stands for justice. You know, there were many leaders, heroic leaders in the global South, particularly in Latin America, who were inspired by the so-called liberation theology within the Catholic Church. Even if their own church hated them for it, we salute them. Ibrahim Traoré led a coup against a government that was subservient to its foreign masters. You know, there's been many, many coups across the continent, but usually those just replaced one neo-colonial agent with another, usually. But Ibrahim Traoré is different. He's not just changing the government. He is uprooting the whole system of neo-colonial domination, and he's succeeding. He's understood what many people have failed to grasp, which is that independence is meaningless if you don't sever the control of the owners and controllers of global financialized capital. He's understood that security is a myth as long as it depends on the military patronage of your former colonizers. And he's understood that sovereignty is impossible under the shadow of Western tutelage. He's not merely a head of state. Ibrahim Traoré is the revolutionary archetype of the 21st century. He was forged in the reality of Western-backed insurgency and Western economic warfare and propaganda. Because, you know, today the fight for freedom is not just waged by armies anymore, but by narratives and by resource policies and by alliances and by collective sovereignty. Traoré has made the choice to look towards Russia and Turkey and towards other new centers of power in the multipolar world. That's strategic, not because they're perfect allies, but because he recognizes the necessity of breaking the Western stranglehold on Burkina Faso. This is pragmatism in service to principle. This again is the methodology of Middle Nation. It's engagement without submission, cooperation without subjugation. It's trade-offs without selling out. He also understands, crucially, that Africa's liberation cannot be rented from outside. It has to be rooted in the reclamation of Africa's own wealth. You know, his moves to exert control over Burkina Faso's gold, building indigenous defense capacity and food sovereignty, these aren't just political decisions. These are acts of civilizational self-respect. It's a declaration that Africa's children will no longer be bled dry for the enrichment of Western imperial capital. We see Ibrahim Traoré as a brother, not simply because of his faith, but also because of his fight, because he embodies the spirit of the Quranic guidance to stand firmly for justice, even if it is against your own selves, even if it is against those who are in power, and even if it is against the odds. Burkina Faso isn't just a battleground today for the Burkinabe people. It's the front line in a global struggle for liberation. What Ibrahim Traoré is doing is echoing in the Sahel, in Niger, in Mali, across Africa, across the Ummah, across the global South, and across the world. Every oppressed people around the world can now look to Burkina Faso and to Ibrahim Traoré and say liberation looks like it's actually possible. But obviously, the global order trembles at the prospect that anyone is going to follow his example. They're afraid of his courage and his clarity and his defiance in the face of Western power and Western threats, and they should be afraid of that. They should tremble because they know the jig is up. But we know that when they get scared, they get dangerous, and Ibrahim Traoré is under severe threat. There's already been something like 20 attempts on his life since coming to power. They just stopped a coup from happening last week, organized by the Americans and by the French, right there in the French embassy. Because a free Africa is just something that that old wolf can't take. You know, they've been keeping Africa in the past for so long that they know that if they let Africa get away from them, then they're going to be the ones who are consigned to history. The chains that have been holding Africa down all this time are also the only things holding the West up. So now America has said that they want to arrest him. You know, they've already tried to take him out more than once, like I said. Now they're trying to smear him. They're trying to attack him. They sent the head of AFRICOM to the Ivory Coast a couple of days ago, which is a neighbor of Burkina Faso and which is known to have allegedly, anyway, participated in the killing of Thomas Sankara. Allegedly, they participated in the coups or helped to organize the coups against coup attempts against Ibrahim Traoré. And the Western sycophantic leader that was overthrown by Ibrahim Traoré is in exile in the Ivory Coast right now. So they're getting ready for something. Understand, Ibrahim Traoré isn't just fighting insurgents and militants in the desert. No, every time he has to meet with some Western diplomat or politician or ambassador, he's fighting that same enemy. They're just wearing a suit and tie and meeting in some conference room or some embassy somewhere. But it's the same enemy that he's fighting in the desert. He doesn't have a meeting with any Western official except it's a kind of combat. Imagine, the same ones that are smiling at you from across the table, those are the same ones who are also paying mercenaries to kill you. That's why there's going to be a continent-wide protest at the end of this month. I think it's on the 30th. And I really hope that we'll see activists fill the streets all around the world, not just in Africa. It's a demonstration in support of Ibrahim Traoré, in support of Burkina Faso, and it's a protest against American and Western threats against him. And I really hope, wallahi, that we see massive numbers globally participating in this. Wallahi, I hope that even we'll see people of the Ivory Coast turn out for it. Listen, this is important. Burkina Faso is important. Ibrahim Traoré is important for everyone, not just for Africans, not just for the Burkinabes. This isn't about idolizing the man. It's about understanding the importance of what he represents. And what he represents is a paradigmatic shift that the whole world needs. You understand me? The OCGFC have been on a path of power consolidation for decades, accumulating more and more power in fewer and fewer hands, and leaving almost nothing beyond their control. We are in a struggle against this consolidation. Do you understand? It's a struggle for decentralization. That's the essence of it. That's what multipolarity is. It's decentralization. We need to pursue, protect, and preserve variance. They don't want there to be any options. They don't want there to be any divergence, any independence. But see, they built their power structure initially on the assumption that American power would last forever. Now they're understanding that they have to recalibrate. They need to transition. It's like they built one of those Jenga towers on a kitchen table, and now they have to relocate it. They have to move that tower all the way across town without it falling apart. Because now you have to move to the global south. It's a completely different terrain than what they're used to. So they're going to try to eliminate as many variables as they can to try to manage this transition so they come out on the top. Because they don't want their tower to fall apart. But if their tower falls apart, that is liberatory for everyone on this planet. Burkina Faso, as I say, represents decentralization. It represents variance. It represents a threat to the power consolidation. They see Ibrahim Traoré as a glitch in their system, but their system is a virus on humanity. Burkina Faso represents not only the promise of African liberation, but liberation for all of us. And the instinct for liberation is not a bug in the human software, it's a feature. So everyone should do whatever they can, and we should all do all we can to try to defend and protect Ibrahim Traoré. Because wallahi, this is a matter of self-defense. Ibrahim Traoré isn't simply a political figure. He's a turning point.
Throughout the 20th century, a wave of African leaders emerged with one goal: liberate their people from colonial and economic slavery. But their noble efforts were often crushed by their enemies from abroad and by enemies within. Let's start with Patrice Lumumba, the first Prime Minister of the Democratic Republic of Congo. A passionate nationalist, Lumumba demanded control over Congo's vast mineral wealth, especially its uranium and cobalt. That was enough to make him a target. In 1961, just months after independence, Lumumba was assassinated in a CIA and Belgian-backed coup, aided by local elites who sold him out. Next, Thomas Sankara of Burkina Faso. In just 4 years, 1983 to 1987, Sankara revolutionized the country, renaming it from Upper Volta to Burkina Faso, meaning land of upright people. He refused World Bank loans, pushed for food sovereignty, and exposed France's neo-colonial control through the CFA franc. His bold reforms made him a threat. In 1987, he was killed in a coup led by his once close ally, Blaise Compaoré, widely believed to be backed by France. Then there's Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana. A visionary Pan-Africanist, he led Ghana to independence in 1957 and dreamed of a united Africa. He built roads, schools, and hospitals, and fought to break free from Western economic domination. But in 1966, while on a peace mission abroad, Nkrumah was overthrown in a coup supported by the CIA and local collaborators. From Amilcar Cabral in Guinea-Bissau to Muammar Gaddafi in Libya, African leaders who dared to assert independence and control their natural resources were systematically removed. And often, it was African hands that carried out the orders. These weren't just political power plays, they were economic heists. Africa is rich in everything the world needs: gold, diamonds, oil, uranium, cobalt, lithium. Yet, African nations remain among the poorest. Why? Because from the Berlin Conference in 1884 to modern-day trade deals, the West has designed systems that keep African nations dependent and poor. Take the CFA franc, still used by 14 African countries and controlled by the French Treasury. Or the mining contracts in the DRC, where multinational corporations extract billions in minerals while local communities live in poverty. Western nations have built their economies on African resources. London's skyscrapers, Paris's luxury, and New York's power are all linked to African gold, cocoa, rubber, and oil. Meanwhile, African nations are trapped in debt cycles, foreign aid dependency, and structural adjustment programs from the IMF and World Bank, institutions that demand austerity while foreign companies get tax breaks. But things are changing. A new generation of Africans, young, educated, and unapologetic, is waking up. They've studied the history, they've seen the betrayals, and they're refusing to play the same game. Leading this awakening is Ibrahim Traoré, the 36-year-old president of Burkina Faso. After seizing power in 2022, Traoré openly rejected French influence, expelled French troops, and called for Pan-African unity. He wears military fatigues, speaks plainly, and walks among the people, earning respect and admiration across the continent. Traoré has said, "We are not afraid. Africa will rise." And millions of young Africans believe him. Social media is fueling this revolution. Platforms like TikTok, Twitter, and YouTube are spreading Pan-African messages faster than ever. African youth are organizing, connecting, and calling out puppet leaders who serve foreign interests instead of their people. In Niger, Mali, and Guinea, young leaders and citizens are demanding sovereignty, cutting ties with old colonial powers, and building alliances with countries that respect African independence. After so-called independence, many African nations were still trapped in neo-colonial agreements. Take the French Colonial Pact, for example. Under this system, 14 former French colonies were required to deposit up to 85% of their foreign currency reserves into the French treasury. In return, they received meager interest and needed permission to access their own money. France used this capital to fund its own economy, while African nations had to borrow money with interest from France or the IMF. This is not partnership. This is economic hostage-taking. And then there's the role of multinational corporations, especially in sectors like mining, oil, and agriculture. Companies from the US, UK, France, China, and even Canada sign exploitative contracts with corrupt African officials, giving them access to billions of dollars worth of resources for pennies on the dollar. For example, in Sierra Leone, diamond mines bring in billions globally, but the workers who dig them earn less than $5 a day, and the government collects barely any tax revenue. In Nigeria, Africa's largest oil producer, more than $400 billion in oil wealth has been stolen or siphoned off by Western oil companies and local elites since the 1960s. Meanwhile, the Niger Delta, where this oil comes from, is left polluted, impoverished, and forgotten. And let's talk about development aid. It sounds helpful, but much of it is a trap. Countries receive loans from the IMF and World Bank, but these come with structural adjustment programs, policies that force governments to cut healthcare, education, and subsidies just to qualify for money. At the same time, they must privatize public assets and allow foreign companies to take over entire industries. So Africa ends up paying more in debt servicing than it receives in aid. In 2023 alone, sub-Saharan African countries spent over $60 billion repaying loans, most of it for debts that funded corrupt or useless projects, often advised by Western consultants. Even global trade rules are rigged. African farmers are blocked from exporting goods because the US and EU heavily subsidize their own agriculture, making African products uncompetitive. So Africa gets labeled poor or unproductive. But the truth is, it's forced to play a game where the rules were written to ensure it loses. Let's not forget the brain drain. Western countries aggressively recruit African doctors, engineers, and academics, people educated at home with public funds, only to serve foreign hospitals and tech companies. That's billions in lost talent and training. And now, we're entering a new phase of resource theft: green colonialism. As the world shifts to electric vehicles and renewable energy, Africa's cobalt, lithium, and rare earth minerals are in demand again. But will African countries finally benefit? Or will history repeat itself? The world knows Africa is rich. It always has been. But through deceptive diplomacy, economic coercion, and corporate exploitation, the West has extracted untold trillions from the continent. And they've used African collaborators, bought politicians, business elites, and even military officers to keep the system running. Africa has not been underdeveloped. It has been intentionally underdeveloped to serve the prosperity of the West. So what does the future hold for Africa? Africa is home to the youngest population in the world. By 2050, 1 in 4 people on Earth will be African. This is not just a demographic trend, it's a global shift. If Africa can reclaim its resources, assert its independence, and unite economically and politically, it will become a global superpower. Pan-African institutions are gaining strength, and the call for a single African currency, common defense, and shared infrastructure is growing louder. But the challenges are real. Foreign-backed coups, corporate corruption, and internal division still threaten progress. The fight is far from over, but this time, the people are watching, the youth are ready, and history is on their side. As the great African revolutionary Frantz Fanon once said, "Each generation must, out of relative obscurity, discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it. The new generation of Africans has found its mission, and they are choosing to fulfill it. Africa is rising, and the world must get ready. Tell me what you think about this topic. Hope you find the information in this video informative. Feel free to like, subscribe, share, comment. Thanks for watching.